Javad, that's J-A-V-A-D, Javad. And the last name is Mohsenian, M-O-H-S-E-N-I-A-N. And I'm not Armenian because many times they ask me if I'm Armenian. And I tell them that all the Armenian last name ends with I-A-N. But any last name which ends with I-A-N is not Armenian. It's like all the balls are round, but anything which is round is not a ball, you know. So anyway, and I'm talking about, Ron has asked me to speak about human rights in Iran. I'm Iranian American, and I'm a psychiatrist and author. With a number, I write novels, you know, and I have some taste in poetry, as many Iranians do, you know. So tonight we're talking about human rights in Iran. I did not expect to start my talk with the game of soccer, football, but I saw a very sad and very funny piece of news in the paper, in the Iran Times International, which I subscribe to, and it was also involved the human rights. So I start with that. You know, football is a very popular sport all over the world. It's catching up in US and Canada too, you know, it's number one sport. And in Iran, the same in Iran. And in fact, they are champion of Asia, and usually they qualify for the World Cup. And considering that the Islamic Republic doesn't like sexual stuff or fancy things on TV, especially with the women who show their face and their hair and their legs and things, you know, people have gotten even more into it, right? So they watch a lot of football games on TV. And TV is a national TV, is a government TV. Now lately, there was a game from Germany, a very big game, important because Bayern Munich was playing. And Bayern is the champion of Germany. And sometimes they go to World Championship. But happened that the referee of that game was a woman. Oh boy. They didn't allow it to be on TV, you know. They just did not, they didn't allow it. You believe that? That's what I say, very sad and very funny. In fact, it went in the German papers and they said that's a very funny piece of news, you know, that they didn't allow it because there was a woman, you know. Here is, I have it, if you want to share it around. The picture, and the woman, all you could see was her hair, her knee and her hair.
It's shocking. You can see her knees.
They're all cheap?
Yeah.
Am I old enough?
I hope.
So it's a lot of abuse of human rights under the name of religion and God. And in fact, there is a very distinguished. And these ladies are mostly journalists or lawyers or let's say they are activists. There is a lady named Narges Sotoudeh, a lawyer, who is a human rights activist for the ladies who don't want to put something on their head, you know. And lately she went on trial, and they gave her 38 years, and some also whipping with a whip, you know. So I don't know what happened. And let me say that also in Middle East, really, the human rights abuse is very, very common. All countries, you know, all the Middle Eastern countries. Human rights abuse is very common. And one of the worst was at Yemen. You probably know about it, that there was a lot of, you know, a lot of crime, a lot of abuse, you know, a lot of bombing, and a lot of women and children were killed and everything. And of course, that was done by Saudi Arabia with support from US. Actually, except for Iran and Syria, all the countries of Middle Eastern countries, they commit their crime under support of US, and they are all US allies, you know. And Donald Trump especially, you know, is backing them up very feverishly. So Iran is one of the oldest countries in the world. In fact, They are the first country with the central government, that they had a central government which was the biggest empire extending from India to Mediterranean to Egypt, So U.S. in fact established relationship with Iran in 1882 because they said after all, they are the first government, Iran has a rich history of tolerance, its culture of love, poetry, friendship, and hospitality. In fact, the Persian poetry is very, very popular, and Hafiz, if you have heard of now, Rumi is getting a big name here in this country, and Hafiz, who was one of the unbelievable poet, great poet. And like when I say is a culture of love and poetry, like one time in 2009, I visited Iran, That was the last time I was there. And speaking of human rights, Bob, you understand me, Bob? Do you hear me?
Ask other people, okay?
Yeah.
My hearing.
Okay. I want you to hear me, though. 2009 was last time I was in Iran, and when I came back, I wrote some articles here and there, different papers about my observation there. And of course, they was all negative. It was unbelievable, especially for me as a psychiatrist. Like you say hello to someone, they come instead of saying hello back, they curse government, and mullahs, the turban-headed mullahs and things, It's like everybody has had it. So yeah, it's But so speaking of the poetry and things, I remember I like to share this story with you. There was one guy, my driver who was taking me around, said I like to meet him. And I met with him, he was a farmer. And he would speak only with poetry. Only with poetry. So as I talked to him, he answered me with poetry. And because he was sometimes a little, not quite with it, I asked him to write that piece down for me. I wanted to see how is his education. He said, if I knew how to read or write, I would be like you. Why would I be coming here farming, And I realized that the guy really doesn't have any education, What I'm trying to say is very common, It's the culture of love and poetry. In fact, Hafiz, that I mentioned his name, Hafiz and Quran you can find in the house of every Muslim. And let me at this point say that Iran has two opposite cultures. One of them is the ancient culture, Persian culture, which, by the way, this was a week ago, first day of spring, was Persian New Year. Happy New Year. And tomorrow is a big ceremony at Penn Museum. The day after tomorrow. So yeah, has these two cultures. One of them is Persian culture, ancient Persian culture, and then another one is Islamic culture, which Islam came to Iran as 7th century, And these two they clash with each other. Because one is based all on celebration, the other one is based on mourning and what happened, especially Shiite Islam has a lot of mourning in it. By the same token, this country has history of a lot of violence, invasions, wars, bloodshed, and revolutions. Dictators have done as they pleased. Dictators and religion has committed a lot of crime in this country, And sometimes, for example, there was a dictator invading like a city, and they would resist him. So what they do, they kill everybody. In fact, when Mongols attack Iran, they kill everybody, including cats and dogs, So that country has been exposed to a lot of violence and everything, And to tell you how things has changed, and because I mentioned something about University of Pennsylvania, if you go to University of Pennsylvania Museum, there's a jar This jar they feel that belongs to 5000 BC. And the theory is that a Persian peasant made wine for the first time, and that's the jar that he made in, So that's very interesting to me. Of course, I knew this, but it's interesting because in today Iran, making wine is a crime. You are not allowed to drink. And it's also was interesting to me to know that in every house, people make their own wine and their own beer. Someone told me that before revolution, before Islamic revolution, when we wanted to drink, we would go to a bar. And when we wanted to pray, we would come home. But no, we drink at home and we go to mosque for praying so that we be seen. The very first religion in Iran was the Mitraism. Mitraists were sun worshippers, And the reason I'm going to that, I want to say that as we move forward, looks like religion doesn't go through let's say, it doesn't get better, it gets worse, Like these Mitraists, that they were sun worshippers, when anybody, because there was polytheism, so anybody's god or any religion was accepted, right? The main thing was that to give sacrifice. But as we move forward, things get worse and worse and worse. And then, in fact, this Mitraism, they had a lot of influence in Europe. And in the year 320, when Constantine the Great had the first convention of Christianity, Mitraists were a big part of it too, and that's why there is a Sunday. Sunday was given to them. And then after Mitraism, there were Zoroastrians. Zoroastrians, they got they're more and more powerful, and looks like in 7th century, when Iran was captured by Muslims, by Arabs, there was situation somewhat, as far as the religion concerned, somewhat like today, because there are a lot of the Zoroastrians priests. They became very powerful. The country became very like they were number one category, and then the court of the king was number 2, military was number 3, and average people was number 4 category, of the people. So it's like I compare the condition of Iran on 7th century with like Eastern Europe after World War II, that was ready for accepting communism, So supposedly Islam was supposed to bring brotherhood and equality to the country. And then eventually through a lot of changes and everything, and the religious leader became more and more powerful, and things just got, rather than getting better got worse. And throughout the history, the Zoroastrians, Christians, Jews, and Christians, they are accepted in Islam. Why? Because they came before Muhammad, right? Muhammad was the seal of the prophet. That was the end. No. So anybody before is accepted, any prophet, but not after. And there is huge discrimination, as we go to it a little later, against any religion which came after Muhammad, in Iran. In fact, in Iran of today, in the parliament, even today, the Jews, Christians, Zoroastrians, they're supposed to have minimum of 1 rep, So they do have rep and they are recognized. But like I said, any religion afterward, forget it, There's a tremendous amount of discrimination. And speaking that the religions before Muhammad has been accepted, anytime there was like a crisis in the country, like they were major war or something, they would go after like the minorities. For example, Iran was a huge country, and a big part of it was lost to Russia in 18th century, like all that Azerbaijan, Armenian, Uzbekistan, Kyrgyzstan, Tajikistan, these are all parts of Iran. So after that major loss, they start attacking like the minorities, like the Jews and Christians, things like that. And something very interesting is that when Safavid dynasty in 13th century took over Iran, and Shiite Islam became the main religion, the religion of the country. They make it official religion. Like, again, they were making Jews and Christians forcefully. They would make them to become Muslim. And this is very interesting that the Jews in Isfahan, the capital, they were not allowed to come out on rainy days. You know why? Because, see, there is something in Islam named tahir and najis. Tahir means, actually there is no word for it in English, but means
Clean and unclean.
clean and unclean. But it's like morally clean, it's like religiously, mentally clean, how can I say, like if you are a prejudiced Muslim and I am not Christian and I touch you, you go and wash your hand, you go on your arm. So if there was like rainy days, they were not allowed to come out because they could make others unclean, But then also, religious leaders always have had a lot of influence in Iran, especially when it came to Islam. In fact, in all the revolution that happens, they were in the forefront. Like when the king in 1830 had an agreement with British people about tobacco, gave them the tobacco, that they wanted to do anything they wanted with tobacco, bring tobacco products, things like that. When a religious leader banned that, everybody broke the water pipes and the pipes and that kind of things. No smoking. And also there was a constitutional revolution in Iran in 1905, which again religious leaders were. But then, unfortunately, all through has been a lot of discrimination, especially against the woman. Like, for example, when it comes to marriage and divorce, I have written, in fact, in this book that I wrote, Gold for Sugar, a lot of these stories based on that. Like a man could tell a woman 3 times, I divorce you, I divorce you, I divorce you in Shiite Islam. And that's the divorce then. However, if he wants to marry her again, he can't. She has to get married with somebody else and get divorced to be able to marry with her first husband. And there is another thing which they call it sireh, temporary marriage. Have you heard of this? Yeah. Have you heard of temporary marriage? Suzanne knows what I'm talking about, right? Your temporary marriage, but then they, like for example, when you talk to the mullahs, they defend it. They say that, yeah, but if there was, like the way that is in the Western countries, if there was a child, who is the father, who is the mother, that there is no any responsibility. But this way is responsibility. If there was a child, that man is responsible for him or for her. And then the other thing, like again, which is a terrible thing against the woman, is that like at the age of 9, Shiite Islam recognized the woman mature. And also let me say, since I was born in a Muslim family, I can say that Muhammad himself had a very good sex drive. and he married many people, many women. And in fact, he reminds me, I compare him with Bill Clinton. He was pretty sexual, So of course, and then they said that in Arabia, which is hot, they become ripe sooner, So, and also, so this is one So there's a lot of discrimination against the woman, and they're all supposed to wear the hijab, something around their head. Their hair should not be seen. Something very interesting, in 2009 when I was in Iran, I saw a car. It was saying that moral police on it. Moral police. Now how can you police morality? And this is, of course, very much against the woman. And to their credit, Iranian woman has, one time they have beaten badly this woman who was moral police, And ever since then, the mullahs put a man and a woman to be moral police. But they were worried about if they get too close to each other.
Right.
Now, when I said also, I said like, for example, especially if there is a lot of discrimination against any religion which came after Islam, One of them being Baha'i religion. In fact, I wrote a story here, Escape from Homeland. And most of the stories I wrote here in this book, by the way, that's $20 if you want later, I have a few copies. They are true or based on the truth. And the hero of that is, I have one story, Escape from Homeland. It's about a medical student who was at the medical school. And they gave them an application. And they asked him about his religion. And because he wrote it, he was thrown out. And here is that gentleman.
I grew up.
Dr. Roshan.
Oh, wow.
Dr. Roshan, would you please, in a few minutes, just not to tell us about that rather than me saying, just tell me what happened to you and how you went to Pakistan and so forth and so forth.
All right, well, thanks for allowing me to do that. I wasn't really prepared to do that, but I unfortunately was a victim of extreme prejudice towards Baha'i faith. I'm a member of Baha'i faith. The founder of Baha'i faith, Baha'u'llah, is from Iran, and the religion is approximately 160 years old. It's a religion that's global, close to 6 million Baha'is.
Umid, please say mostly about yourself, because I have Dr. Mahajer.
Sure. And then briefly to say I had to leave Iran based on the fact I was Baha'i, and they expelled me. I was about 19 years old, and I had to escape Iran, go to Pakistan, and from Pakistan go to Spain, and then finally wound up in the United States about 30-some years ago.
And just to add to that couple words, they excluded him from medical school because he wrote to application that he was Baha'i. And then they wanted to send him to Iran-Iraq war. Because if you go to college, you are exempted. You don't go until you graduate. But then he wasn't good enough to go to medical school, but he was good to go to war. And in fact, speaking of Baha'i religion, I have Dr. Mahajer here, who was making airplane for Boeing. I don't know if but he was making the good ones.
Yeah.
And he knows a lot about that. I asked him to take the floor and tell us something about what was going on and Baha'i religion and everything.
Well, thank you very much. Dr. Mohsenian asked me to share some information about the violation of human rights in Iran. So first I thought, well, I'll sort of give examples, because as Dr. Roshan mentioned, violation of human rights and Baha'i life go together. From the inception of the Baha'i faith until today, had always been there. So I decided I'm going to take just 3 episodes. One at the beginning of the faith, another one at a more recent time, and the most recent time that I can share. But then I figured, before I actually say that, maybe a little bit of introduction about what this Baha'i faith is that results in this kind of a persecution. So the whole thing would not take more than 8 minutes. I've sort of briefed it so that they asked me to limit it to 10 minutes. It's going to be 8 minutes. So I'll give you a brief history of the Baha'i faith, and then these 3 episodes, different times in the history of the Baha'i faith that I would share with you. The origins of the Baha'i faith go back to a religious movement founded in 1844 by a young Iranian merchant Sayyid Ali Muhammad Shirazi, who took the title of the Bab, which means the gate. His followers were therefore called Babis. The government, under the influence of the clergy, fearing the very rapid growth of the movement, decided to arrest the Bab in 1846. To separate him from his followers, the Bab was imprisoned for the remainder of his life and was finally placed in front of a firing squad consisting of a regiment of soldiers in 1850 at the age of 31. Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i faith, was born in Tehran in 1817. Baha'u'llah became an enthusiastic supporter of the Bab's teachings. In 1852, Baha'u'llah was arrested and thrown into an underground pit. Although most of the Baha'i prisoners in that prison were executed, Baha'u'llah's life was spared because of his high social position on the condition that he go into exile. Successive exiles as a prisoner of the Ottoman and Persian empires and by their orders took Baha'u'llah to Baghdad, Constantinople, Adrianople, and finally to Akka in then Palestine, that was part of Ottoman Empire and today country of Israel. While in exile in Adrianople, Baha'u'llah openly announced his claim to be the inaugurator of a new religious dispensation. It was here that Baha'u'llah dispatched a series of letters to the leading monarchs, rulers of the world, and heads of religions of his time. These letters were sent to Nasir Shah of Iran, Queen Victoria of England, Napoleon III of France, Tsar Alexander II of Russia, Kaiser Wilhelm I of Prussia, Sultan Abdul Aziz of Ottoman Empire, and to Pope Pius IX. He called on them to turn to his teachings, to abandon warfare, and become reconciled among themselves. He insisted that it was the state's responsibility to take care of the poor. He sternly criticized the great gap between the wealthy and the poor. Baha'u'llah passed away in 1892. His resting place is in Akka in Israel, which is now a focal point for the worldwide Baha'i community. As I said, this was just to say who Baha'is are, and then I'll give you 3 very brief episodes of human rights. This is actually, there was an officer from an Austrian officer that was deployed to the Nasir Shah's court. He was an advisor, and this is his letter. Now, believe me, I've spared you the gory details of it because it's heartrending. But extracts from a letter dated August 29, 1852, by an Austrian officer who was in the employment of the government of Iran. He describes the persecution of the Babis in the streets of Tehran. The manner of inflicting the sentence, the circumstances which precede the end, the agonies which consume the bodies of the victims until their life is extinguished in the last convulsion are so terrible that the blood curdles in my veins if I now endeavor to depict the scene for you, even in outline. Innumerable blows with stick which fall heavily on the back and soles of the feet, brandings of different parts of the body with red-hot irons, are such usual inflictions that the victim who undergoes only such caresses is to be accounted fortunate. But follow me, my friend, you who lay claim to a heart and a European ethics, follow me to the unhappy ones who, with gouged out eyes, must eat on the scene of the deed, without any sauce, their own amputated ears, or whose teeth are torn out with inhuman violence by the hand of the executioner, or whose bare skulls are simply crushed by blows from a hammer, or where the bazaar is illuminated with unhappy victims because on right and left, that the people dig deep holes in their breasts and shoulders and insert burning wicks in their wounds. They will skin the soles of the Babis' feet, soak the wounds in boiling oil, shoe the foot like the foot of a horse, and compel the victim to run. No cry escapes from the victim's breast. The torment is endured in dark silence by the numbed sensation of the fanatic. Now he must run. The body cannot endure what the soul has endured, he falls. This is what happened in 1852.